Hello, curious minds. Welcome to season 1 of Mentorless podcast, a show where I deconstruct the process behind the making of a film. I look at the creative and tactical steps my guests took from having an idea to releasing their finished project into the world. I'm your host, Nathalie Sejean, and in today's episode, I talk with American media maker Jacob Firing about his first feature documentary, Samantha's Amazing Acrocats. Together, we talk about following your instinct when a potentially interesting topic pops out, making a documentary without knowing its final shape, where to place your budget when you have none, attending Doc NYC Fest, and much, much more. If you're into documentaries and thinking about making one, listen up, you will learn a ton. Don't forget to subscribe via your favorite app. You just need to search for Mentorless Podcast and click on the subscribe button. And if you like the show, consider rating it. It really helps. Enjoy the ride, and I'll see you on the other side. Jacob, thank you for being on the show with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to talk about your first feature documentary named Samantha's Amazing Acrocats. And we're going to deconstruct the whole process you've been through from having the idea to releasing it, distributing it, and where you are right now. Before we start with how you got the idea, can you tell us where are you from and where do you currently live?
So I'm originally from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So originally from the Midwest, but I currently live in Brooklyn, New York.
If I were to meet you at a party tonight, how would you introduce yourself? What would you tell me you're doing?
I would say, I guess, that's a good question. I'm a media maker. I guess maybe that's probably how I'd define myself. Conversation.
And how do you explain media maker?
I guess that I do different kind of projects across the board, from feature film now to music video to video installation and everything in between. Some documentary work. So yeah, kind of all of the above.
So right now we're going to travel back in time, and I'm going to ask you to try remember. Hopefully you can. How did you first get the idea, or in for a documentary, I'm guessing it's a little bit different. How did you first encounter something that led you to making this documentary?
Well, we are going very far back in time. It was probably 6 years ago at this point. And basically, I was making shorter documentary projects. I was making music videos, directing music videos, and I had really always been interested in creating a longer form piece. I'm really interested in a longer form narrative as well, of course, as a maker. So initially, my friend who lived in Chicago, I was living in Milwaukee at the moment, both in the Midwest, of course. He texted me a picture of a cat circus flyer, and I saw this text and I was like, yes. I didn't really know what a cat circus entailed, but I was intrigued. And I didn't really have intention of making a longer form film. Really, I figured if Samantha, who's the main protagonist in this film, if she was interested, we might do a short piece together. But basically, I went down to Iowa, where she was performing a show in the small theater there, and asked her about her circus. We'd communicated beforehand, so it's not like I just showed up and stalked her. But I was like, "Can I come down to this show and maybe we can make a short piece together?" She said, "Sure." And initially, that's what it was going to be. But as we continued shooting over the course of a couple weeks on and off, I realized that there were a lot of interesting ideas and moments in Samantha's life that were occurring. And so it kind of spiraled ever so slowly into this longer form piece.
So I'm interested about deconstructing this phase actually. When you first went to see her, did you already have a camera? And do you remember how you kind of decided on how much you were going to follow her, or when you were going to meet again, all these elements?
Right. So, I mean, the first time we showed up, it was kind of more like, we'll see, I didn't know what to expect. So I was like, okay, well, we'll check out this show and see if there's something there that could be compelling on screen. I had no doubt that her show was compelling, but of course, it's always a question of whether something in the real world will translate to the screen. So basically, at that time, if I was doing a project and I was hired on a music video or something, there was a budget to rent a camera and equipment. But for this, I didn't really have any of my own equipment. So I asked a friend who had a camera if he could come along, kind of, found random people who could provide audio equipment. And we just went and decided to see what this would entail, what this show would look like. And Samantha is someone who's a performer. She's very comfortable, on stage. So that kind of translated to how we began shooting. Basically, we started shooting right away, and she didn't have a problem with it. She's like, "Oh yeah, feel free to film me setting up for the show." We did a short interview that day, which kind of seems, generally speaking, I don't really do that on first shoots if I'm doing a documentary. But she just seemed like a very comfortable person on camera and on screen. So that was the initial approach we took.
So this was over the course of one day or several days?
Yeah, about 48 hours. It took us some time to drive to Iowa. In retrospect, we probably could have waited to go to a closer show, closer to Milwaukee, where I was residing at the time. But I think, in my experience, I always sort of want to strike when the iron's hot. When I have an idea for a project, I really just want to jump in and immerse myself right away. To maintain momentum as we move forward. So we drove down, stayed at a hotel, shot with her all day, filmed with her all day, and then headed back. We kind of left it at that point that we would be in touch for future shoots. She was really friendly and seemed open to filming further. So basically, we got in touch a couple days later, and we drove to a show she was doing in a small town in Illinois, and shot there. And from there, the process continued.
Do you recall if there is something that made you feel like, okay, it's worth for me to go back to another show and bring my friend again and spend, I don't know, a couple of $100, or I'm not sure how much this type of little momentum were costing you?
So, I mean, initially, I feel like after the first shoot, we were still sort of trying to find our footing and understand what this project would entail. What I do know is after seeing her show, I just thought it was fantastic. Basically she created this really unique show from scratch by herself. This really bare bones yet impressive show. She got people to show up, and I was kind of a bit enamored with this show and the passion behind it. So I wasn't really sure if this piece could sustain itself for a feature length, but what I did know is that I found the show really compelling, and the motivation for producing the show very compelling. And so, at that point, after seeing it once, I knew that I wanted there to be at least some documentation of the show, whether it was a shorter piece or a longer one.
So this happened in 2012, this first encounter? No, 2011, you said.
Yes, 2011, I believe. Yes, it's been a long haul.
So you started filming pretty quickly after that, and over the course of how long have you been filming, and how did you fund this journey?
So these are all good questions. Like most documentary filmmakers, I feel like especially first time feature documentary filmmakers, the budget was pretty close to non-existent. So basically, we found some grants once post production started, but for the first 5 to 6 years, basically, predominantly, I was paying out of pocket. One of the reasons why it took so long to film is because of that reason. I was working other jobs at the time, and we'd film for a couple weeks and then we would wait around for more money to come in and continue that process. That being said, I think in retrospect, that was an important part of the process because we really, over the course of time, follow Samantha and really, in my opinion, I believe, begin to understand her world over the course of 5 years in a way we wouldn't if this was shot in 6 months. So I think the patience really comes through in the story as well.
I'm curious, do you know how much was the budget? I know you didn't have a budget, but you still spend money. So let's say, looking back, how much did these first 5 years, how much money did you put into these first 5 years?
Right, and I mean it is all in the books. I would have to take a moment and look to tell you exact numbers. But what I will say is this was shot literally with literally like next to no money. Essentially, I didn't even own a car at the time. I convinced a friend who was interested in helping, and we would drive all over the country to New Orleans, to Minnesota, wherever with his car. We borrowed all of the equipment. We asked a lot of favors and returned those favors by helping with other people's productions. Sometimes we would sleep in a car on the side of the road, or in Samantha's vehicle when she was sleeping in a hotel. She was nice enough to let us sleep in the vehicle sometimes. So sometimes we would travel in the vehicle and do that. So really, the only expenses we had were gas and food. Everything else was just us doing it, out of our own volition. So.
And you were doing the editing. How was it working after shooting? Once you were coming back home with the footage from a new shooting session, what were you doing with it?
Yeah, so I mean, for the first year or so, I didn't really touch too much of the footage. In fact, a lot of the footage from the first year we didn't even end up using. I think the first year was really more about, in retrospect, even though I didn't really realize it at the time, the first year was really more about being comfortable with each other. So, filming with Samantha and making sure she was comfortable on camera and we were comfortable in sort of developing this relationship. But so the first year there wasn't much editing. And then from there, began piecing the footage together and creating scenes and seeing what we had and what we thought worked. And that sort of was a continuous process till the end. In the last year, we hired an amazing editor to help finish the job because basically at that point I had lost perspective and I really felt I needed someone in the editing room with me. So this amazing editor, Armando Crota, came on and he helped. Well, I'd say he more than helped. We worked collaboratively to craft the final story.
How did you meet with him? How did you find him?
It was a very serendipitous experience because I was looking for an editor. And of course, as I said, our budget was really limited. So, especially in New York, it's like, some top rate editors, they cost a lot of money. You're paying for what you get a lot of the time. They're really good at their craft. And of course, it's going to cost a lot, especially in a city where the cost of living is pretty high. But so basically, I was looking around, I was asking friends, and one of my friends said, or she told me that she was part of this listserv in New York, where basically a bunch of different media makers post, either jobs or, inquire about different talent. And so she was nice enough to post an ad, and a bunch of people responded. But one of the people that was really notable was Armando, the editor that I worked with. And so really the first time we met was via Skype and we just talked about the project. I sent him a link of footage that I had edited together and we talked about what the final project could look like and went from there.
And at that point, you already knew you were going for a feature, right?
I did, and it was really complicated because one of my concerns was whether this film could sustain itself for a feature. I knew that it felt like a longer film than a 8 to 10 minute short, and I wanted to use all of this amazing footage to craft a piece. But I was trying to determine a length that would be you know that would be a good length, and would not only be watchable but sustain itself and be engaging. So that was one of the questions, and it turned out being a relatively short feature, but I guess technically it's a feature film.
One of the things that I found very interesting in your documentary, which you kind of mentioned before, and I just want to make sure that I'm imagining it right, is the
Mhm.
fact that there are a lot of ellipses. The time is passing between two filming session, and you understand time is passing, although you might not know how much time has been passing between two moments. And I was just wondering, you were basically going there when you had time, or were you in touch with Samantha and she was telling you, I think it might be interesting for you to be here at that point. And the reason why I'm asking that is because there are a couple of moments in the documentary where I found it interesting that there was not more content about a certain type of event.
Mhm.
Uh, and it felt like I wasn't sure if some moments were not there because you took them out in the edit, or because you were not there to shoot and this kind of make it the way it is.
Right.
I'm thinking specifically about the whole crowdfunding moment. I don't want to spoil people too much, so I don't want to say anything about just saying there was this crowdfunding moment. But
Mhm.
I was intrigued about how did you organize your shooting period.
Yeah, so I mean, basically, Samantha and I were perpetually in touch, especially at the beginning. She had just started working with this circus. We kind of caught her closer to the beginning and the conception of this show. So she had a lot more time to be in touch with me, is the impression I got. So, in other words, initially, she would let me know whenever an event was happening. And as she began finding a bit more success, I think, as you can probably tell from watching the film, her show is like a 24/7 job. She's either driving from one city to another. She is, training her cats. She is, building new sets. She's doing all these things. She's, constantly working at her craft. So at a certain point, I felt like, it felt like she didn't have as much time to keep me posted, and it required me, inquiring a bit more and saying, okay, what's happening in your life at the moment? Can we check it out? So I would say that it's kind of a mixed bag. So in other words, there are some moments that perhaps we didn't catch on film, but there are other moments where we decided to really shorten those scenes in order to serve the story and the arc, and not necessarily make the duration of certain scenes too long, to because we really discussed what we wanted the arc of the film to look like. So I would say it was probably a bit of both that was happening.
From the IMDb, I understood that you were taking care of the sound during the shooting.
So yeah, I mean, this was another thing due to the bare bones, next to nothing budget of this film, or at least in production. The budget kind of increased in post a bit, but uh, initially it was me and the producer Tom Trudeau. He was for the most part handling camera, and I would handle the boom and ask questions and direct it simultaneously. Towards the last couple of years, since we didn't have a budget, I couldn't really ask him to keep performing these duties. He of course had things he needed to do in his life, so I became sort of the camera person, director, and audio person all at once. So yeah, the first couple of years I was doing more boom work simultaneously, and at the end I was sort of doing it all, except for a couple shoots that felt really important, for sit-down interviews and things like that, where I brought in a larger team that could light the space and that could shoot it while I sat down and interviewed. But yeah, so that was also a mixed bag. There's a lot of improvising over the course of this period of time.
Well, that's great. I mean, how are you doing when you were handling the camera to get good sound? Did you put a mic on her or?
Yeah, so a lot of time I would put a lav on her, and also had a shotgun mic on the camera. Sometimes, unfortunately, due to the fact that she's constantly in motion, there wasn't time to put a lav on, and in that case, we had to deal with what we had. But I tried to as much as possible.
Basically, one of the things that I always find impressive in documentaries and that happened in yours is the fact that it really felt like you had access to pretty much everything. Samantha really opens up while doing her other stuff. It's not like she's sitting on a chair looking at you and talking. It's like she's just not trying to pretend. I'm guessing over the course of many years, it's hard anyway. But the opening of the documentary is her waking up. How do you happen to shoot when someone is waking up and going through their morning motion? This is a question I have.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And I think it differs from project to project. As I said, I think due to the fact that Samantha is a performer, she felt pretty at ease and comfortable around a camera. So, shooting her getting up, basically, there was always a conversation regarding what would be shot. For me, I try to look at documentary making like having a conversation. In other words, I'm not trying to like hide and get the shot secretly or covertly. To me, the joy of working in documentaries, collaborating and hopefully both parties get something out of it. If not, it doesn't really sit well with me, or I like the camaraderie of working together on something. So conversations like that were had beforehand. It wasn't like I was just like busting into her van and like surprising her with the camera. We kind of talked about it the night before or a couple days before, and she's like, yeah, that's fine. You can come in and film me getting up if whatever you need. She was pretty generous in that regard, regarding what footage she allowed us to get. But there were a lot of conversations. I always wanted to make sure that I was not overstepping any boundaries as much as I could. It was never worth it for me to exploit a situation to get a shot. So hopefully she felt as comfortable as possible throughout the process as could be given, the close quarters and dynamics.
So there is I don't know how much of it you realized when you were filming and how much of it happened in the editing room, but there is this Samantha's journey is a very interesting mirror to any creative's journey, which is basically, I'm doing something I love, but it's a struggle and nothing tells me if it's going to get worse or get better and for how long. And this is just the way it goes for all of us. Even a success doesn't mean, that it's going to stay like this. How did you decide to stop this story, and how? It's two questions that have nothing to do with each other, but how did you decide to stop this story, and how did you feel about this? It's not an easy story. Her story is not an easy story, and you had there is nothing that tells you it's going to get better or it's going to get worse. I'm guessing in the first few years you were filming. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like it was you had a good instinct on something that could have just stayed that way for a very long time. So I'm just interested in the process of how did you feel it was time to stop at the moment you stopped the story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think you ever fully know. But something interesting you said, which really spoke to me as well, is as I was filming Samantha, I really identified with what she was doing. I see quite a few parallels between a cat circus and being a filmmaker, or as you said, making any piece of art. So, I think that fact really kept me open to continuing the process for a long period of time, because I did really identify with what she was doing. Um, as far as ending the project, it reached a point where I believed that we were exploring very specific ideas of artistry in contemporary America and what that means. And so I believed we hit the certain point where she reaches a certain peak. I don't want to talk about that too much, of course, and give anything
Yeah.
away. But
That's the trouble
but
with documentary. We cannot say anything.
exactly, we're talking in abstracts here and in broad strokes, but it's really funny. But basically, it hit a point where I was like, okay, every scene in this film is basically leads to a certain idea about pursuing a craft or pursuing a vision, and we could have kept filming. But I felt like we hit a point where it was conclusive, at least to a certain degree. And once I realized that there was this pinnacle moment that, felt like there was at least some sense of closure, I felt like, that was a great moment to stop. I was like, we could film another 5 years and see if things change, but I feel like there is this really defined moment that could serve the story and be an ending. And I think instead of seeing what happens over another decade, now is the time to finish this up. If that makes sense. I know I'm trying not to give too much away while giving a satisfactory answer.
I think it does. I think it does.
Yeah.
So during this first 5 years, when you were it was just you basically shooting with your friend at the beginning, and then on your own and editing a little bit. As you were seeing that you were spending more and more time doing this project, and it was likely to become a feature documentary, did you ever consider launching a crowdfunding campaign to help you sustain your efforts during the shooting of the documentary?
I did, and it was a really difficult call, because on one hand, I was like, this could really help the film. On the other hand, I felt really conflicted for a couple reasons. One of them is just that, I didn't want to potentially take money out of Samantha's pocket. She over the course of time develops a fan base, and she tours constantly, and one of my concerns was that maybe people would decide to give money to this, but then maybe not buy her merchandise that helps sustain her, or not go to one of her shows. So for me, I was really trying to affect or not affect her life, or I'm sorry, affect her life as little as possible. Also, I had made a lot of projects before, but this was my first feature. And as a first time feature filmmaker, maybe this is me being stubborn, but I really feel like I wanted to prove that I could make this, and not ask other people to help without them really having an understanding of my work as a feature filmmaker, since that was something that was not completely there was really no proof that I could do this yet. So, not to say you shouldn't ask for money when you're trying a new endeavor, but for me, I think there's something in me. It makes it hard for me to ask for financial help when I'm pursuing art.
So you come back, you were done with shooting, and the real post-production phase was going to start. Were you still in Milwaukee at that moment?
So at that moment, things became a bit more complicated, because probably about 2 to 3 years into the shooting process, I had moved to Philadelphia, and then eventually to New York. So I moved a couple times, and so I would fly back to Chicago in the Midwest to shoot sometimes. And sometimes she was touring on the East Coast, so we would actually film in Philadelphia, or film in New York when she had shows there as well. But I will say that a lot of the footage that we shot was captured when I was still living in the Midwest. It was almost like By the time I'd moved, it was more about getting very specific and pinnacle moments. We felt like we really had a lot of footage that encompassed her road life and her touring life.
I'm interested in understanding what was your thinking in terms of not only post-production, but also were you starting to think about distribution, film festivals? And the reason I asked is because it interests me, of course, but
Sure.
one of the things you wrote to me when you wrote to me about your project is that you said, I learned that with zero connections to industry and film festivals, it is possible to make something that can be shared, discussed, and find an audience. So what's interesting to me in your journey is that you really made a feature film pursuing a story that was interesting to you, but not necessarily having anything in place to make sure it would, you didn't have any advantage, let's say. So what did you do? And how did you learn, discovered, and acted to have your film into festivals and anything you want to share with us?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because in retrospect, filming this project, it was such a naive time in my life. Just regards to, you know, basically I just followed an impulse. In other words, I was like, I think this project that this woman is pursuing is beautiful and amazing, and I think it's really cool, and I think it would make a great story. And it was at a time where really internet content wasn't as prevalent as it is now. Just as far as of course the internet existed, but I feel like there's really been a shift towards online watching in a way that wasn't there before. So I really wasn't thinking about distribution, which if I made this film now, I would probably think very differently. But basically I was like, I want to make this project. I think it would be something potentially that other people would want to see, but that was really as far as I took it. And towards the end of making it, then I was really trying to consider, okay, what is distribution going to look like? And it was actually something I became pretty concerned about because I realized in the editing room that this was going to be a fairly short feature. It's not like a 90-minute feature that has a more theatrical length. So I was concerned that festivals may not want it as a result of it.
Maybe we should say that the feature is 70 minutes, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I think technically, at festivals and on television, a feature is 52 minutes. So mine definitely makes the cut in that regard. But, a lot of film festivals, this is my understanding of it, at least, probably a film festival programmer could speak more to it than I, but, my impression was that it's more difficult to put in a shorter film because for programming's sake, a lot of programmers potentially want to put a film in a festival that's at least 80 minutes so that an audience feels like it's worth going out to see it, instead of going somewhere for 50 minutes and then turning around. Although that might have changed a lot in the past couple of years too, as, content has so many different lengths now. I think some of those barriers are being broken or, people have a different idea of what a duration of a film should look like. I'm kind of rambling a bit, I guess, but it's interesting. So much is rapidly changing in a way that I feel like it wasn't when this project began.
It's true that it's every 3 years now. When you look back, it feels like, wow, if I had known this was going to go that way, I wouldn't have done it like that. But so I'm intrigued about. First, I should take a step back and go back to the post-production. You said you got a grant for post-production. So what in post-production did you do? What did you apply for? What type of grant did you get?
Yeah, so I mean, there were a couple different ones I got. I was living in Philadelphia at the time. And basically, there's this association there called the Philadelphia Film and Video Association. So I applied there, and I received some help. I was actually at the time I was in Philly because I was doing a master's program in media there. And so I also was provided with some university funds that was really helpful that I applied for. So those were the two predominant ways I received funding, which really helped in post production. And I mean, I also, since production costs a little, I was perpetually saving, knowing that in post production, I would need to supplement whatever grants I got if I got them. So, I definitely put some of my own money into the pot as well.
So is this like $5,000 or much more or much less?
I'm trying to, again, it's all in the books. I don't know if I could tell you a good number now, but I would say it's probably, are you asking how much post-production costs?
Just to have an estimate, if we're talking about like 5,000 or 25,000, it's just for people to understand the scale, because for everybody, no budget means something very different. So
Yeah,
it's interesting to understand how much money you actually need, either on the lowest type of scale.
right. I couldn't tell you an exact amount, but I would say I believe, total it was around $10,000 I received in funding. And then I supplemented as well.
So post-production costs definitely more than the actual production of the movie.
It did. And, at the time I was, the one thing, even though I was really naive, is I knew that in this case, in documentary, where so much of the story is crafted in the editing room, where we had hundreds of hours of footage over the span of this amount of time we were shooting, that it would, require funds. So I was also, saving and being as frugal as possible simultaneously.
Were you also saving for film festivals application, possibly you attending those festivals? How did you do for the festival application? I'm guessing you took care of everything, or you had someone helping you for that?
Yeah, I mean, I essentially took care of everything. The producer I worked with, Tom Trudeau, the co-producer, he put in a little bit for film festival submissions here and there as well. But really for the most part, that was me too.
So do you remember, to approximately, it doesn't have to be an exact number, but I'm really interested in knowing how many film festivals did you apply to? Did you, once you realized that you had to think about film festivals, did you try to build a strategy, or did you just apply to anything that seemed like a fit?
Yeah, it's really interesting because closer to the time of submitting, the realization that this film may not play in any festival, sort of crossed my mind. And I was like, okay, so what are we going to do if it doesn't get into festivals? I was prepared for that not to happen. But I after working on it for so many years, you definitely I wanted to try to see where this could go. But I kind of had zero expectations, and not because I didn't believe in the film, but because I feel like it gets more competitive each year with accessible technology. So many people are making things and submitting them to curators. But my strategy was sort of, I did, to apply to the bigger, a lot of bigger festivals, just to know that I did. I didn't necessarily expect to get in. Applied to Sundance and a couple others. And then from there, I also applied to the bigger documentary festivals, which, I would say predominantly that's where we've been screening, which has kind of been perfect for our film. When I applied to Doc NYC, I really wanted to screen it at that festival because I thought it would, be a great festival for this film. But I didn't expect to get in. I was really surprised and, excited to be part of such a great festival at that point. So, we kind of applied to the big festivals and then sort of isolated and worked our way down to other festivals that we thought might be a great fit for the film.
And so when you got into IFC and your film premiered there, what did was it like one screening during the festival, or there were several screenings? Did you print flyers, or were there Q&As? Were there anything during that time that did you meet any distributors? I have no idea how it works over there. So can you tell us about it?
Yeah, so I mean, Doc NYC, it's a really great festival because I think they really strive and try to help filmmakers, meet people in the industry. It's not like you're guaranteed to sell a film there. I sure didn't. But they set up daily. There's meetings that you can have with a couple other filmmakers and distributors to kind of just understand the lay of the land a bit. So you can ask them any questions. You can say, potentially, if they're interested, can I send you a link to my film? And so, yeah, to answer your other questions, I guess I'll start at the top. We had one screening there. It was really great. It was on a Friday night, which was kind of a really ideal time at the IFC Center. And yeah, we kind of tried to promote the film as much as we could. We made flyers and sort of isolated locations where we thought interested parties would go. Printed out a couple posters. But that being said, our budget is so tiny that there were some things I wish we could have done, or I wish I had accounted for that I didn't. I wasn't able to hire a publicist, and I think a lot of other films there did that. So really, I was for a month emailing a lot of writers and seeing if we could potentially collaborate on a write-up or an interview. I was doing all the press myself, so I was sort of juggling like 80 hats at once at that point, trying to finish up post-production, trying to promote the film both digitally and in the real world. I don't know. I guess I don't know what the real world is anymore since digital has taken over. But I was sort of tap dancing. I was doing a bit of everything.
What happened after the screening? Do you feel it helped the documentary getting in other festivals? And where are you now, basically, with the movie?
I don't think necessarily. I guess I can't quantify if it helped it get into other festivals. In other words, I think all the programmers that I've met, they really love films, and the impression I've gotten is that they really choose the films that they think will best fit both as a curated festival, but also that they really enjoy. But I will say that festival put a bit more attention on it, which I felt was really helpful. And I think my film at Doc NYC was probably one of the lower budget films on the totem pole, perhaps the lowest budget. I'm not going to make that bold statement, but we were really bare bones, and I really appreciated them programming it because it is a lower budget production. But after the festival, I received emails from other festivals inquiring about it. So I won't say that it got me into other festivals, but I will say that because Doc NYC is, a pretty big documentary festival, I think other people learned about it from that. Right
now, where is the documentary? Did it play in theater? Or could you find a distributor? Could you sell it? What happened next?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And, maybe we should check in a couple months, because it's still actually, we're in the process of deciding the best steps to take. We've spoken with a couple distributors. We're still playing the festival circuit. We're going to be at the San Francisco Documentary Festival at the beginning of May. We'll be playing in Australia, in Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. And I'm not quite sure what we're going to do yet. That's still something we're discussing.
What are the different options you're thinking about?
Well, there's a couple distribution companies that have expressed a bit of interest. Something else I've considered is self-distribution. Although, there's pros and cons to both of that. And it's something that I didn't really consider when we began making this film. And also, I think something that happened simultaneously to making it is that there is a large cat fan base out there. An internet cat fan base. I think that sort of blew up while we were making this film. So, I am kind of contemplating, while this film isn't specifically about cats, obviously that is a part of the story. So I am thinking about, who would be interested in this film and how to distribute it to interested parties, people who just enjoy documentaries and people who love cats and who would enjoy this and the best outlet for this. So I guess I wish I had information to tell you about the actual distribution, but that is something that, we're going to figure out in the next couple months.
It's very funny. In the new episode that I'm going to release tomorrow, technically, but not when people will hear that, it will be in the past. I interviewed Elizabeth Subrin, who is a filmmaker who is also based in New York, actually.
Oh, that's so funny. I know her.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you do?
she's great. Yeah, A Woman Apart, her film she made.
Exactly.
Yeah, she made it a fantastic film. Yeah, when I was getting my master's, she teaches at Temple, and we talked about my film. Yeah,
That's
she's
so
excellent.
funny. So, but maybe you can talk with her about what I'm about to say directly. But something she said that I found very interesting, and she mentioned the fact that for her movie, one of the things she did but wished she had more funds for is that she hired an engagement strategist,
Hmm.
which is we don't have this work title in France, and I don't think this work title exists in many countries, but basically in the documentary world in America, apparently, there is this person called engagement strategist who is going to target the audience that would be receptive to the topic of the documentary and organize Q&A and whatever events to create some buzz.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that, first of all, because I know Elizabeth, and that's really funny. But also, yeah, I actually recently spoke to an engagement strategist or something similar to that, I guess. And, I'm considering hiring a publicist, but what I'm really trying to do, regardless of, how this actually comes to fruition, is looking into select cities that, Samantha has toured in, and, where there are people that would really enjoy this film, and trying to set up some grassroots screenings if possible, and, really sort of build a community around this film. Because I think, one of the really beautiful things about her art and her circus is the fact that there is this community that really appreciates her work, and we're hoping to build outward from there.
I don't think it's the case for a lot of movies, and I think it might be very hard to self-distribute because for the price of one film, people can just have a Netflix subscription. But
Without a doubt.
in your case, I think there's a lot of potential as long as you can find the people who will help you out.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%, and I think more now than ever, it's something that, everyone should consider from the beginning of production. Something, as I said, that I definitely didn't consider, and the climate was very different. But now with so much competition for eyeballs on media, I think it's more important than ever to say, who is this film? Not necessarily who is it for, but who is really going to engage with it. And so I agree with you 100%. That's almost the most important part, if you want people to see, the project, of course.
Yeah, because it always sounds like it's going to happen on its own. And I think until you really get to until you make your first film and you realize how much work it actually takes for a movie to be seen, it's hard to understand that it's like, even though everybody has internet, it always makes it worse right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, where do I turn? Where do I look?
Exactly. So you mentioned, of course, that you wished you had maybe started to think about film strategy earlier, and but besides this point, what are the biggest lessons, if you have them in mind? They can be practical, they can be philosophical. You're taking with you from this project to your next project, whether it's a documentary or not. I just think as a creative and as a maker.
Yeah, I mean, I think, one of the big things is I'm really trying to, as I said, that when this film began, it was made during a very different time in filmmaking history. I don't want to make it sound that grandiose, but and so, now as I make my next project, I'm really trying to think, where can this exist and live, kind of what we were talking about, but just in terms of, uh, I'm considering, would the next project just play on the internet? Would there be a specific forum for that? But also, I guess, I'm really, considering how much of the budget should go to outreach, and it's kind of something we just talked about. But I think that's the greatest lesson, because when I made my first feature, I was so focused on completing it, and doing all of these steps by myself. The idea of distributing it sometimes slips through the cracks naively, and that's really, what it comes down to at the end of the day, if you want people to see it. I would say also, after this experience, I really, the next project I'm planning on working with a lot more collaborators. It was really kind of great working predominantly with one other person or by myself, and I think this project couldn't have been made in another way. I think the way the story is told, this bare bones crew, was essential because it's kind of a more intimate portrait, I guess you could say. But in the future, I really want to make sure that I have a solid crew in place to make the next one. So I can really focus on these, one specific and important area of production or post at a time instead of juggling it all.
Yeah, it's funny because one of my big question is, if you would have started thinking about distribution early on and have maybe hired someone to help you create some audience engagement, would you have taken as many years to shoot your film, or would you have feel the pressure to release it as fast as possible? And I think in your case, your film benefited from covering many years, as you said, instead of being done in 6 months. And that might be partly because you were not spending money on other departments and felt like it needs to move forward. That's totally subjective, unscientific, personal opinion. But what I find interesting with your film is that at the same time, the internet revolution is playing in your favor, because cats are a thing now, which,
Right.
it was not really, I don't know, like, I don't feel, it's even hard to remember how it was 5 years ago. This is how crazy fast things are changing. But, today it does feel that there is an audience for cats topic,
No.
even serious ones. And so that's kind of my internal debate, which is, we always say hire someone to help you with the audience engagement as fast as possible, as early as possible in your project. And at the same time, how do we know because most projects take 3 to 7 years. So,
Right.
if your next project is going to take, let's say, 5 years, because we're optimistic, what we're doing today is going to be relevant in 5 years from now. I don't know, in terms of audience engagement, I mean, not in terms of content creation. So,
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point, right? I think before this huge internet revolution, you could probably have a very specific plan for engagement, and now it's as you said, it's rapidly changing every 2 seconds. I think what's important, really, perhaps arguably, is making sure that the audience that would be interested in this film is engaged with as soon as possible. Just finding that audience, even if there's potential for the film to shift or the way it's made or distributed changes. Just having people, in some ways, it almost seems like the future of media is community based. In other words, so many people are releasing content online and finding communities. So I think that's one avenue that's interesting to think about and worth exploring more, which wasn't done with this film in the preliminary stages.
you mentioned you were working on something right now. Are you working on something right now? What type of project it is, and if you can tell us about this, actually.
Yeah, so I mean, I basically, because this film, we've been going to all these festivals, and thinking about distro. I have a lot of small projects in the works, either shorter documentaries or and web series ideas as well, but nothing I can speak on too much as of yet, because basically I have a huge list of projects that I'm going to get started on as soon as this film is distributed. So it's more, there's a lot of ideas percolating, and I'm trying to decide which is the next one to work with for the long haul or the short haul, I guess. But one of them is going to be a smaller collection of short documentaries, and I kind of want to play with that form and put them online and see how that goes.
If people want to know more about the documentary and or reach out to you, what are the best ways for them to do it? And then, of course, I'll link to everything on the site.
We have a website for the film. It's acrocatsmovie.com. Our email is on the site, and you can just contact us directly, and we'll get back to you. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. All of those links are on our website. So yeah, definitely reach out there, and we'll get back ASAP.
Jacob, thank you so much for your time, for taking us through your creative journey.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Keep us posted, keep me posted, and I'll make sure to keep the website posted and the readers
certainly
posted. And until next time then.
Oh yes, until next time. Thanks again for having me.
This episode was produced and edited by me, Nathalie Sejean. The music was created by French artist Soul of Bear. You can discover their techno universe on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/soulofbear. You can find all the show notes along with all the previous episodes on mentorless.com/podcast. Thank you so much for sticking around until the end. I'll see you in 2 weeks for our next episode.